Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, How Indianapolis MPO Automated Grants Management and Expense Control. Today's webinar is sponsored by Piango. My name is Mark Brousseau, industry analyst and researcher. I'll be your moderator for today's event. So there's no question that municipal organizations want to be good stewards of donor money. Unfortunately, studies show that up to 44% of an organization's time can be spent on manual grants management activities that don't directly relate to program delivery. The question you might be wondering is, well, how did we get here? Well, managing grants can be complex, and time-consuming, and risky. Organizations have got to deal with multiple stakeholders and multiple locations, multiple departments, lots of administrative tasks, lots of project requirements, and, oh yes, ever-increasing regulations. And many organizations are using spreadsheets to manage their grants. Some organizations, they try to manage grants by modifying systems that were designed for other purposes. And all of this leads to a lot of inefficiencies and unnecessary complexity. Manual and these semi-automated approaches to grants management, they create 5 really big issues for organizations. The first is operational bottlenecks. For many organizations, managing grants means pasting together data from multiple systems and sorting through disparate spreadsheets and tracking information provided by different stakeholders. You also have lots of errors when you have manual and semi-automated approaches to managing grants. That's going to significantly increase your chances of errors and mistakes. You're also going to have burdensome compliance issues. Manual and semi-automated grants management processes make it hard to comply with mandates and grant requirements, and even to enforce donor terms and conditions. You're also likely to face poor communication and lousy collaboration. It's hard for stakeholders to collaborate on grants, to access that single source of truth, or even to ensure compliance when their organization relies on manual and semi-automated approaches. And finally, manual and semi-automated approaches to grants management doesn't provide the reporting that organizations need. And things are worse for organizations that lack the tools to tightly manage their expenses. And all of these are the reasons that more and more organizations are automating their grants processes. Automated solutions help organizations, big and small, with full grant management and accounting, matching of grants with other funding sources, automated direct and indirect cost calculations, and even pass-through sub-award expense management. Automating grants and sub-award management, it provides big benefits to organizations: streamlined operations, better accuracy, reduced compliance burden, streamlined communication, better collaboration, and enhanced visibility. But don't take my word for any of this. Let's hear from one organization that has automated its grants management and expense control. I want to introduce you to Sean Northrup, Deputy Director for Indianapolis MPO. He'll be joined today by Melissa Hinkleman, Social Impact Director for Oracle NetSuite, and Mike Caniff, co-founder and CEO of Piango. Sean, you're up first today. Tell us a little bit about Indianapolis MPO and your role in the organization.
Sure, happy to. Thanks for the introduction. I'm the Deputy Director at the Indianapolis Metropolitan Planning Organization. We're a unit of government. We're a regional entity, so we have a board made up of every city, town, and county in central Indiana around Indianapolis. We cover about 1,500 square miles and about 2 million people in population. Our role as a governmental entity is to make sure that federal gas tax money that flows back into our region gets spent in accordance with the wishes of local elected officials, so that decisions aren't being made for how infrastructure projects get spent at the federal level or state level. We have all of the mayors and town council presidents and county commissioners and transit agencies all come together quarterly around a table with us, and we make decisions about how those investments are going to be made and how we're going to prioritize transportation investments for the next 25 years. We receive approximately $55 million a year from the federal government. Every major region of over 50,000 people in the country has an MPO, an organization similar to us that has at very least a planning and infrastructure allocation program like we do.
So why is grants management strategically important to Indianapolis MPO and your peers across the country?
Sure, grants management is foundational to what we do. All of the grants that we receive from the federal government require a match, and our job every year to spend those grants down. So it's funny, every time we work with business consultants, we say we're not like a lot of private enterprise. Our profit, we have no profit margin at all. Our job is to get money every year and spend that money down to zero every year or within a year afterwards. Most of the grants that pay for our operations are an 80-20 match. So 80% of this expenditure needs to be the federal grant that we receive. And then there's an additional 20% that comes from local match. And that's the dues that all of our 36 member organizations pay to us. The cities, towns, and counties around Indianapolis, pay that match on the dues each year. And so all of our expenses, when they go out 80% federal and 20% local for the entire cost.
Sean, before automating, how did Indianapolis MPO manage its grants process?
So there was an interesting trigger for us when Indianapolis consolidated. So for those who aren't familiar with Indianapolis, the city and county are consolidated into one jurisdiction. And that effort was called Unigov. It was essentially so that the city of Indianapolis could recapture the tax revenue as they were dealing with some pretty significant population decline in the 1960s and early 1970s. And so they incorporated all of the suburbs within the county into one jurisdiction. So they were able to mask some of the loss in revenue that you saw in places that saw really similar economic decline, like Cleveland and Detroit. Indianapolis was able to deal with that a little bit better because they were still kind of recapturing those tax revenues. When that happened in 1970, that's right about the same time the federal government started requiring MPOs. And so our region was the central county, and the MPO was wrapped into the new consolidated city county as a division of the city county of Marion County, Indianapolis. That went on until 2019. And over those 40, 50 years, the region continued to grow to where no longer was 100% of the regional population within the one central county. Now it's right about 50% of our region's population is within Indianapolis, Marion County, and about 50% is outside. And so it made less and less sense over time for us to be a division of just our largest member. So we made a pretty significant push from 2018 on to become an independent entity. We had to go get legislation from the State House and break off on our own. And so when we did that, when we finally broke free, we set a date of June 1st, 2020 as our official relaunch date as an independent organization. And that meant that we needed to replace all of the very large enterprise infrastructure that we were using as part of the city of Indianapolis with our own accounting, human resources, legal frameworks that we had to build for ourselves. So before we did that, we were, as a division of the city of Indianapolis, the city uses PeopleSoft. So we were within the Oracle Peoplesoft environment. We did not have great transparency to the data that we had. It was not super automated. It took a long time to kind of figure out where we stood financially on some things. And we got pretty good at operating within that environment, but being able to customize it for ourselves has been a game changer.
So describe the process that Indianapolis MPO used to evaluate potential solutions.
So we started right around January of 2019. We worked with a business consulting group called Katz-Sapper Miller Consulting, KSMC. It's a business consulting group based out of Indianapolis. Now they're called Resultant. And we worked with them to write up a requirements list for our ERP accounting software, as well as our human resources information system. We spent about 3 months putting everything into it and designing what we thought the perfect system would be for us and what we wanted it to do and what the base requirements were. I'm happy to actually share that document after this webinar. Anybody can see that as a resource. Then we worked with that consultant to line up interviews with different vendors. So on the HR side, we talked to Workday and Paylocity and Kronos and Paychex. On the ERP side, we talked to Oracle, both for PeopleSoft and another cloud product that they have, and NetSuite, and then MIP, Sage, Intact. So we talked to a number of different groups. We spent I believe 2 hours with each one of them, kind of getting a full demo of the product, which then we let everyone know that would lead to a competitive procurement process. We are subject to federal procurement law, so we had to have a competitive procurement process. We couldn't just select one without that. Once we did the procurement process, the city's contract, we were still the city at the time, scared away about half of the vendors that we had seen. It's a pretty draconian contract that really protects the city. And so we ended up having just a few to choose from. And the way we did it was we procured separately. So we did it HRIS and our ERP separately. So we picked separate systems, and we selected implementation vendors with the actual software. We weren't just choosing the software, we were choosing the team that was going to help us put it into place. And so the team that we ended up selecting was called Profit One. It was a local implementation vendor that had contracts with NetSuite. The NetSuite was the software we selected, and we really got to work in the late summer and fall of 2019 with this really hard deadline of June 1st, 2020 was when we needed to be able to launch. So it was a pretty tight timeline.
Sean, what were the most important attributes you were looking for in an ERP software and an ERP software provider?
There were a few things that were big priorities for us. One was transparency and knowing where we stand on all of our grants. Like I said, our job is to spend our grants down to zero every year. And so we had to know how much money was encumbered and how much we had left to contract. And that's central to how we operate the organization. It was a very hard number to figure out in our previous environment. Within PeopleSoft, we used a number of reports that we built our own custom Excel workbook out of. I think I had 3 or 4 pivot tables that I would update on a weekly basis just to try and come down to that one number. How much have we expended? How much is encumbered? And then how much do we have left to contract? And then be able to report that back out on a monthly basis to the state. Where do we stand? What have we done with your grant money? How much more is coming? When are these projects going to be done? So that was really key, was knowing where we stood. And then the other big key, if I had to say, which was more important, I'd say they were probably 1 and 2. They were probably close to 50-50. The other one was just compliance, making sure that we could pass an audit on our own. One of the nice things about being a division of the city of Indianapolis was that we were a little bit buried when it came audit time. The city did an internal single audit and then would spot check for different grants that they would focus on. And we got selected every year, but it was not a big deal. And the city had a very large staff to really focus on and help us through our finances. We had a CFO that was assigned to us that was able to manage those things. We lost all of those resources when we moved out on our own. And our audit requirements became much more stringent. We are now subject to a single audit from the state auditor, which they move in and watch you for a while and really embed and figure out, what's going on with the finances. We needed to be able to pass that. We needed to be able to say with a straight face that we are good stewards of taxpayer dollars. We are spending them in appropriate ways, and we need to be able to document that and show that, as competently as possible. And we have no accountants on staff. We have a team of planners and coders and financial managers and things like that, large grants managers, but we do not have an accountant on staff. So we had to staff up quickly with consultants and build our own capacity through this contract and in building out NetSuite for us.
Melissa, describe the NetSuite Social Impact Program and the Suite Cloud Developer Network and how it fits into this discussion today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much. So my name is Melissa Hinkleman. As you saw, I'm the director here for NetSuite Social Impact Group. To give you just a little bit of background, I've been working in the nonprofit government grant funding space for about the past 15 years and been here at NetSuite for about 5 years now. So it's been my life working with organizations like Sean's group. At NetSuite, one thing that drew me here was the program that they had for grant-funded, nonprofit, governmental organizations and the work that they did. So we actually have a dedicated team here in a program that was built, about 10 years ago, where we actually started granting our software out to smaller organizations who had a mission that they were serving, and that has grown leaps and bounds over that 10 or 12 years to actually be a full, what we call vertical here, in which we work with large and small government, nonprofit organizations really across the spectrum, receiving all different types of funding. And still to this day, we have a donation that every organization gets of the software, whether you're small or large. And we have programs to make sure that organizations are utilizing the software to their fullest capability. So we have pro bono offerings where we have consultants come in and help you either on a kind of a one-day event or on a quarterly basis to make sure we're utilizing the software correctly. I mean, as we heard Sean say, sometimes you might not have kind of the full staffing that you need, or you just need some additional help. So we want to make sure the types of organizations like that have the mission that they serve, nonprofit or government grant or funding focus, can rely not only on the software that NetSuite provides, but also our team as well, to make sure that you are serving the mission that you have set out to serve, and really have built a program here to be able to do that. We've also learned that as NetSuite, there's a lot of different areas that we serve, and we can't always do everything. So we have built what we called our Suite Cloud Developer Network, which is certified partners that are part of the NetSuite ecosystem that help build on top of the NetSuite platform to give us additional functionality. So when it comes to very complex grant management, indirect cost allocations, things of that nature, we've partnered with Piango to help enhance the functionality with the software. Built right onto the platform, looks and acts and feels and is a part of the NetSuite solution, and have had really some great success in the realm of grant management, expense management, to be able to track that information correctly, report on it, and make sure we're spending the money exactly where we need to spend it.
Mike, how does Piango help MPOs and other government organizations?
All right, thanks, Mark. This is Mike Caniff, CEO of Piango, and Piango has been around since 2013. Our focus is actually building applications on top of the NetSuite platform. So we're part of that Suite Cloud Developer Network. And so our grants management product provides some of that advanced and automated functionality that Melissa just mentioned, where it's built right into the platform. It extends the kind of native grants capability within NetSuite to provide some of the advanced functionality that MPO needed. And then we can also automate the expense controls around that process. And then, as Melissa mentioned too, it's certified. So every release that NetSuite comes out with, we have to go through what's called a built for NetSuite certification process. And so we validate that our products continue to work with the latest release. And then those releases, because it's all a cloud-based solution, those releases are automatically deployed to each of the accounts. So MPO also gets those releases, which then includes the Piango certified product.
Melissa, let's talk about the NetSuite implementation process and how you help make that easier for government organizations.
My previous life, I was a consultant and used to demonstrate and write scopes of work for implementation. So I'm well versed in implementation. And what we always found was when you see a product, you get the demonstration, everything looks great. It's exactly what you need. And then when you go to implement, this blank screen opens up in front of you and the consultant says, what do you want to implement? And, we're not quite sure. It's a new system. We're trying to change processes. We're not sure of all the functionality of the system. And that's the way still today a lot of software systems implement. Well, NetSuite used to be like that. And we've actually changed it over the past couple of years in our terminology and what we call our Suite Success implementation, where we've worked with, at this point, over 2,500 nonprofit governmental organizations. And we've realized, even though everyone is unique in their own right, they all have some similarities. There are certain things that need to be tracked. Everybody has certain roles within the organization. We typically do see a CFO role, a grant manager, an administrative role. There's certain reports and grant reports that need to be tracked and created on a regular basis. So we've actually built a lot of that into the system. So literally, NetSuite's deployed, you open it up, KPIs, dashboards, roles within the system are already there. So we're not starting from this white blank screen that seems extremely overwhelming. What we're doing is giving you a baseline, and we say we get you, 25, 50, maybe even 75 yards down the field. But then we go through personalization of that. So talking about things like workflows or the grant setup or the chart of account structure, is that going to work? If not, let's make the tweaks and changes, because it's very easy to kind of see things on screen and make those small tweaks and changes, as opposed to having this overwhelming task of building everything from scratch. And what we found is that we've been extremely successful with that. We are now allowing people to go live a lot faster, because a lot of those tasks that are so monotonous and tedious are already completed for you. So you can really focus on the business, what makes your organization unique, and make those changes. So we go live faster and get that quicker ROI, and get up and running and actually utilizing the tools faster and quicker.
Mike, how does Piango extend the functionality of NetSuite, and what's involved in deploying your solutions?
One of the really neat things about what NetSuite has built out within their platform is the ability to package or bundle these partner-related solutions. And so we take advantage of that. And think of an Apple App Store where you're going to install an app onto your iPhone. It's basically the same process, a little bit more complicated, but our grants product and our budget control product are set up that way. And so each of our clients, and MPO specifically, could install the Piango bundle into their NetSuite account. And then from there, we go through a typical requirements process to make sure that any unique requirements from MPO can be configured within the Piango products. And so then we go through a configuration process after that, check a few boxes, tweak a few reports, things like that. Then the grants product and the budget control product can be up and running. We go through a user acceptance test and then go live. So obviously that's a little bit more simple than reality, but we are pretty close to that. So we can take our products and have them work seamlessly with the overall NetSuite ERP system.
Sean, it wasn't just grants management that Indianapolis MPO automated with Piango. Tell us about that.
We mainly brought in Piango to focus on that 80-20 split and managing that within grants. That was something that, we really needed done well, and Piango has handled it seamlessly. So when we were preparing for this, I was talking to one of our implementation vendors, and I said, I'm having a little trouble differentiating what the difference is between Piango and NetSuite, right? Where one ends and where the other begins and what exactly we're using. We automated every part of our financial, right? We did PO and contract approval, invoicing our members, ACH, approvals and payments, receptions, our banking, our monthly reconciliation. For Piango specifically, our board reports, we report back to the board on budget spent and grants progress each month, and our budgeting. Pretty much every part of our financial process has been automated.
So talk to me about the benefits Indianapolis MPO has achieved through automation, both with NetSuite and Piango.
We've gone kind of interchangeably between government and nonprofit when we're talking about NetSuite. And I just wanted to clarify that we use the NetSuite nonprofit instance. It's worked very well for us. We fit well into it. We've changed some of the names to kind of match up with our terminology. That's been like a really small change, but it's been really good. What Mike mentioned about Piango kind of being built on the NetSuite platform and being seamless is absolutely true. It's got its own tab. It's tied to each one of the transactions that we do. Like I said, it's hard as a user to differentiate, I think, between one and the other sometimes, just because it is incredibly seamless. I think if it had been a separate process, it could have been tricky for us to kind of keep track of the budgeting separate from the day-to-day financial tracking. So I'm very thankful that the two are very combined. We stay in compliance on our grants. We know where we stand at any given time. That's a huge change. It takes a lot less staff time to try and figure it out. It probably saves us, I would say, 2 to 4 hours a week, kind of in oversight on doing that in staff time. We can report on the budgets much more easily to the state. We see our grant balances. We did a custom report with Piango early on that was just a total game changer, where we calculated that grant amount to contract. And that's kind of the central number that management uses here at the MPO to know what we need to take on and do. And so that's been, the single most useful thing of the entire effort, I would say.
Sean, I know I speak for a lot of the attendees listening in today when I say that what Indianapolis MPO has accomplished is very impressive. The question they might be wondering is, what lessons can you share from your automation journey?
Many things. Our situation was pretty unique in that we started making a big push at the end of 2019. And then when COVID hit, we went, like almost everyone else, went 100% remote. So all of our training and back and forth with the implementation consultant was virtual. Frankly, it worked fine. I think if you want to stay remote or work with somebody across the country or across the world, it doesn't really matter where location is. I don't believe Mike and I have ever met in person, but we've worked kind of closely on the budgeting process for a very long time. So distance didn't matter at all. I think some in person for the training might have been helpful for the rest of the NetSuite side of things, but we did a train the trainer kind of approach where we trained all of our key staff on how to use NetSuite and Piango, and that was just fine. That was a good approach for us, and we're going to be able, I think, to pass it on to other staff and employees as necessary. I would definitely advocate utilizing Sandbox for any changes you make within the system. So Sandbox is an option that you can select within NetSuite. We tried to do everything in Sandbox first, that we wouldn't actually break our production account. So far, knock on wood, that's worked out very well. We have not broken our production account that I'm aware of, and we've definitely made mistakes within the Sandbox. I would recommend that add-on to absolutely anybody who goes through implementation. I would also warn a little bit against over customization. We have this lingering headache that we had built a custom invoicing tool that did a really nice service for us. We kind of identified in 2015 and 2016 that we were getting the same mistakes over and over again from consultants that we had contracts with. They were having trouble submitting invoices, dates were overlapping, they were constantly getting flagged in federal audits as kind of non-compliant invoices. So we tried to automate that entire system. We built a custom tool with a local web developer to manage our invoices. It does something similar to like what bills.com does, except it gives us a lot more control internally. We then tried to integrate that with NetSuite, and that's been a real challenge. Not for NetSuite reasons. It's actually been on the other side, on the invoice portal side. It's a custom piece of software that we essentially had to rebuild. And so if and when we get that working, it's going to be incredibly nice to have up and going. We've submitted that as a suite idea within Oracle to have kind of a similar invoicing controls system. I don't know if that's something they'll look at doing, but I think the larger idea is to try and stick with the best practices and what comes stock in the system as much as possible. It's built the way that it is for a reason, and to try and roll with that.
Melissa, from your perspective, what's a key takeaway that our attendees can learn from Indianapolis MPO's story?
I think one thing to think about is so many times we talk to organizations or they come to NetSuite and they're only thinking about one piece of the puzzle. So a lot of times people come, looking just for grant management or maybe looking for just a purchasing and contract expense management tool, when we need to maybe kind of expand that thought process. Technology has come a long way, and NetSuite, the whole reason we have the suite at the end is because we have a whole slew of applications within our ERP. So it can handle multiple areas within the business, from core accounting to grant management to purchasing and expense management. We have, even HR and payroll and forecasting and budgeting. So I think maybe taking a look, if you're just looking at kind of one area from a departmental level, maybe stepping back and taking a look at the systems that you have in place and how things might be automated across the entire business. So maybe thinking a little bit more broadly, as you heard from Sean, right? It wasn't just, hey, grants and expense management, is we're going to look at ERP and we're going to look at HR as well. So there can be a lot of automation and a lot of things that NetSuite can do to have everything on one platform, which is going to reduce duplicate data entry. It's going to reduce those redundancies. It's going to reduce costs and contracts that you have with multiple vendors. So it could be an opportunity to take a step back and look across the business as a whole.
Mike, what do you believe is a key lesson that our attendees can take away from Indianapolis MPO's story today?
I think, one thing is to look at the overall ecosystem, that when you're working with a large platform provider such as NetSuite, what is the complete picture? And beyond just, say, for example, Piango on the SDN side of things, but the implementation partner. So in this example here, we worked closely with Profit One as the implementation or the solution provider that went through the full ERP implementation. And our project plan, our specific things that were related to Piango were folded into the general ERP implementation. And then, of course, Sean's team played a key role in that. And so the availability of that team to work directly with Piango and with Profit One, I think made the overall project a success. We were able to meet and beat the deadlines of our go live from last year. And so even with pandemic that came across, we were able to get everything all ready and then went live, within budget and on schedule.
That brings us to the Q&A portion of this webinar. Sean, one of our attendees is wondering, how did you manage change during this implementation process?
So being in the pandemic was multi-edged sword here. A lot of other work slowed down and allowed us to have capacity to work on this, which was really good. But then not being in person meant that we had to stay really up on our, online engagement tools and communicating with each other virtually. It was nothing but change for staff for about a year. So 6 months, I would say 6 months prior and 6 months after, the entire year of 2020, in addition to the work from home thing. We tried to manage that in a number of ways. We had a retreat early on to kind of keep track of everything that was going on, to try and outline all of the changes that were happening. We had weekly team meetings, and then sub teams kind of met every other day or every few days to try and kind of work through that and make sure we stay connected. Both of our vendors, Profit One and Piango, were very, very clear at the onset about what the timing of deliverables was going to be and the key decisions that needed to be made, and stuck to that schedule as rigidly as I've ever seen a vendor do. We hit or beat every single deliverable deadline that we had. I don't think we even delayed a meeting. We stayed really on top of that schedule. And whenever we did have something that came up as a risk, I think it became immediately clear to everybody, and a workaround was established right away. So I would say communication, we haven't come up for air yet, but I'm hoping in the next month or two, we'll be humming along at a more sustainable clip.
Melissa, another attendee wants to know, does NetSuite integrate with ADP, Concur, Invoice and Expense, or Salesforce? And are there already existing APIs for these and other solutions?
Yes. So those are very common tools that are one, if not several of those, are usually a part of just about every implementation that we do. And we actually have, as I think it was Mike who was talking about the App Store, we have a website you can go to. It's suiteapp.com, which is suiteapp.com. And that will show you a whole host of pre-built tools that we have, just like Piango, that have partnered with NetSuite, part of that SDN network. And we even have, implementation partners that have other integrations. So there's a whole host out there. But yes, those are definitely very common ones that we integrate with on a regular basis.
And that will be our final word. On behalf of Piango and our speakers today, this is Mark Brousseau. Thank you so much for joining us. If you have additional questions, we encourage you to reach out to Piango via their website. Thank you, everyone.